Nothing I ever do is enough. It was a humid morning in Honolulu, the kind that makes your shirt stick to your back before the sun even rises. The streets buzzed with tourists and the smell of fresh malasadas drifting from the corner bakery. But inside the little house tucked behind a grocery store on Kapiolani Boulevard, Leilani's world was already cracking. She had been up since 5 o'clock, moving slowly through the kitchen in her worn-out slippers, preparing breakfast like she did every single morning. The eggs were perfectly scrambled, the toast lightly golden, and the coffee brewed just the way Michael liked it. She placed the plate gently in front of him with a hopeful smile. But before she could even sit down, his mother's voice pierced the room. "Really, Leilani? Butter? You're already over 300 pounds, and you're still eating butter?" Leilani's hand froze mid-air. Michael didn't say a word. He just kept scrolling on his phone, ignoring the silence that fell like a heavy curtain over the table. Her heart dropped. Again. Her mother-in-law, Margaret, had moved in after a hip surgery 6 months earlier. Since then, every meal, every glance, every word was laced with bitterness. Leilani couldn't breathe in her own home. "You want to talk about health? Then stop pretending like what you're doing is working," Margaret said with a smirk, sipping her coffee. "You're not a child. You should have some values by now." Leilani felt the sting behind her eyes, but she held it in. She always did. She had learned how to bury her emotions deep, where they wouldn't cause trouble, where no one would see. Margaret never missed a chance to remind her she didn't belong. Michael could have had anyone, a woman with ambition, money, discipline, not this. The way she said this like it was filth made Leilani's stomach twist. She had been married for 6 years, and every year the weight of her loneliness grew heavier. Not just on her body, but on her spirit. Leilani had never cared much about money. She believed in love, kindness, and family. But lately, even her beliefs felt like lies. That evening, she stood alone in the bathroom, staring at herself in the mirror. Her long black hair was tied in a bun, her eyes tired and sunken. Her body, wrapped in a faded t-shirt, bore the stretch of years and pain. She tilted her head. "Maybe she's right," she whispered to the mirror. "Maybe I don't belong here." She thought of the last time Michael called her beautiful. She couldn't remember the date. It had to be at least 3 years ago, maybe more. She turned sideways, pulling at her shirt to hide the rolls that clung to her like shame. She hated mirrors. They were the only ones honest with her. But the truth was, she hadn't felt healthy in years, and not just physically. Emotionally, she was running on fumes. Spiritually, she was empty. There was no prosperity in her life, only survival. She had stopped believing she could be happy. Stopped dreaming about change. Stopped hoping someone might actually see her as a woman worthy of respect. That night, as the sound of laughter drifted from the living room where Michael and Margaret watched TV, Leilani cried in the dark. Quiet, shallow sobs. She didn't want them to hear. They wouldn't care anyway. She cried not just for the weight on her body, but for the weight of being invisible. She remembered being a girl, barefoot in the grass of her grandmother's yard in Honolulu, dreaming of a big life. A life full of love, purpose, maybe even wealth. Not just money, but richness of the soul. Where did that dream go? It died somewhere between the wedding photos and the first insult. Somewhere between sacrifice and silence. The next morning, Margaret greeted her with the usual jab. "If you can't control what's on your plate, you'll never control your life." Leilani nodded, said nothing. But inside, something cracked. And cracks, when pushed far enough, don't just break. They shift, they change, they open space for something new. For the first time in years, a new thought entered her mind. What if she's wrong? And with that tiny question, the story began to change. No one's coming to save you. The following week, the island rain came in sheets, tapping hard against the windows like a warning. Leilani stood barefoot in the kitchen, staring blankly at the calendar. It was Thursday, June 2nd, 2005. Her 32nd birthday. No one had remembered. Not Michael, not Margaret, not even a cheap card from the drugstore. Just another day in a house where her presence felt like a burden instead of a blessing. She washed the dishes in silence, her fingers pruned and cold. In the background, the TV played one of those real estate shows Margaret loved. People buying homes with big kitchens, wide windows, lives filled with laughter. Lives that looked like prosperity, like freedom. Leilani couldn't remember the last time she laughed freely. She looked around her own kitchen. The paint was peeling near the sink. The fridge buzzed too loud, and the curtains smelled like old oil. There was no money for upgrades, no wealth, no new beginnings. Just survival. Later that night, Michael came home late, smelling like beer and outside air. He didn't look at her when he walked past. He just dropped his bag, kicked off his shoes, and slumped onto the couch. Leilani tried to speak, just a whisper. "Hey, do you remember what day it is?" Michael didn't even look up. "Thursday. That's all?" He shrugged. "You want me to say happy birthday?" She swallowed the lump in her throat. "It would have been nice." Michael rolled his eyes and stood up. "Leilani, we've got real problems. My mom's got medical bills, I've got work stress, and honestly, you sitting around crying about birthdays like a little girl isn't helping anyone." She stood there, frozen. He kept going. "If you spent half as much time thinking about your health as you do feeling sorry for yourself, maybe things would be different." Leilani said nothing. Her mouth wanted to scream, but her heart was too tired to open. Margaret walked in just then, holding a glass of water, and chuckled under her breath. "Happy birthday, princess," she said sarcastically, then walked away. That night, Leilani didn't cry. She just laid in bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly, counting each blade as it passed. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her mind was spinning too. She thought about all the things she used to dream of. A home filled with love, kids running barefoot in the yard, a life of values, things that mattered, health, joy, a partner who didn't just love her, but cherished her. She whispered to herself, "No one's coming to save you." That sentence hit hard. It was a truth she had always avoided, always hoped against, but now it felt different. Now it felt like power. The next morning, she didn't get up to make breakfast. For the first time in years, she stayed in bed. Michael called from the kitchen. "Leilani, where's the coffee?" She didn't answer. Margaret knocked twice and barked through the door. "You think this house runs on fairy dust and feelings?" Still, silence. She stared at the ceiling and thought, "I'm done." At noon, she finally got up, walked to the bathroom, and stepped on the scale. 328 pounds. She stared at the number. Then she wrote it down. She grabbed a notebook, scribbled the date, and said it out loud. June 3rd, 2005, 328. She didn't know what she was doing exactly, but she knew she needed to start. She opened her laptop and searched for women in Hawaii who had gone through weight loss journeys. Real women. No pills, no fads, just sweat, effort, and pain. She found stories. Stories of women like her, women who had been broken, humiliated, forgotten, and who found their way back to the light. They didn't just lose weight. they found themselves again. She saw words pop up over and over: health, self-worth, discipline, wealth of spirit. Words that felt foreign to her, but also magnetic. She closed the laptop and whispered, "I want that." No, she needed that. Not for Michael, not for Margaret, for her. And so, the next morning, while the rest of the house still slept, Leilani laced up an old pair of sneakers and stepped outside into the humid Honolulu air. The sidewalk was wet. The sky was gray. But her path had never been clearer. She walked, not far, just to the corner and back. But it was a beginning born not out of revenge, not out of shame, but out of a quiet decision. I deserve to be healthy. I deserve to feel alive. I deserve to reclaim my life. And as she walked through that still morning, a thought returned to her, faint but steady. What if I'm more than what they see? The first step hurts the most. It was 6 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, June 4th, 2005, when Leilani tied her shoelaces and stepped outside again. The streets of Honolulu were still waking up. The sky above was painted in soft pink and gold, and the ocean breeze rolled in gently through the trees. But her legs were already sore, and her back ached. Still, she walked. 1 block, 2 blocks, her breathing was heavy, sweat clinging to her neck before the day had even started. But something about the pain made her feel alive. Each step whispered a truth she had long buried. Change doesn't wait for permission. It begins quietly, in the mess, in the aching body, in the places no one claps for. She came back home and scribbled the number in her notebook again. 326 pounds. 2 pounds gone. Probably just water weight, she thought. But still, it felt like something. She hid the notebook under her mattress. She couldn't let Margaret or Michael find it. They'd laugh, or worse, use it against her. That evening, she made a salad for dinner. Margaret glanced at the bowl and scoffed. Trying to impress someone with lettuce now? Michael didn't even look up from his plate. Leilani kept eating in silence, chewing slowly, reminding herself why she started. That night, she sat at the edge of her bed, flipping through a health magazine she had picked up from the gas station earlier that day. She read about nutrient-dense foods, walking routines, hydration. It all felt overwhelming. But one sentence stood out. Discipline is choosing between what you want now and what you want most. She wrote that down on a sticky note and stuck it on the mirror. Every morning that week, she got up before sunrise. She walked, she stretched, she drank water, she swapped white bread for wheat, fried chicken for grilled. She didn't starve herself. She didn't punish her body. She respected it, maybe for the first time in years. By Friday, June 10th, the number read 321 pounds, 7 pounds down. She stood in the mirror, looking at her reflection. Not much had changed on the outside. But inside, something was building, not fast, not loud, but steady. She went online and joined a local support group for women on a weight loss journey. Real women from Oahu, from Honolulu, from places she knew. They shared recipes, struggles, small wins. It felt like the first time someone actually saw her. One woman named April messaged her directly. "You're from Honolulu too? What's your story?" Leilani hesitated, then typed. "I'm married, no kids. I've been called every name in the book. I just want to feel like I matter again." April replied instantly. "You do matter. And this journey, it's not just about pounds, it's about freedom." Leilani read that message over and over. She remembered a day years ago when Michael told her that prosperity was about money, stocks, real estate. But now, She was starting to believe that true prosperity was something deeper. It was peace of mind, ownership of your time, respecting your own body, and surrounding yourself with people who knew your worth. The next morning, she walked all the way to Ala Moana Beach Park and sat on a bench, watching joggers pass by. She took a deep breath, the salty air filling her lungs. "I'm not there yet," she whispered, "but I'm not where I was." And for the first time in what felt like forever, she smiled, not to please anyone, not to hide, just because she felt proud of herself. She got up and walked back home with a new kind of posture, not because she was lighter, but because her hope was heavier than her shame. That night, Margaret commented again. "You're glowing. What's going on? You meet someone or something?" Leilani looked her straight in the eye for the first time. "No, I met myself." Margaret blinked. Michael glanced over, confused. But she didn't explain. She didn't owe them anything. Because when your values shift, so does the way you let people treat you. And that shift? That was just getting started. You don't owe them your silence. By the time June turned to July, Leilani's mornings had become sacred. She woke up at 5 o'clock sharp. No more dragging herself out of bed. No more sluggish movements. Her body still hurt some days, but now it was the kind of pain that meant growth. Her notebook showed a new number, 294 pounds. She had lost 34 pounds in just over a month. But more than the weight, something deeper had shifted. She was becoming visible again, to herself. One morning, she passed by a mirror in the hallway and didn't look away. That was new. She caught a glimpse of her face. Her cheeks weren't as round. Her eyes looked clearer. She looked alive. Later that afternoon, while Michael sat watching a baseball game, Leilani walked into the room holding her grocery bags. She had started buying fresh food for herself. Lean proteins, vegetables, fruit. She no longer ate whatever was in the house. She made time and space for her own health. Michael glanced at her. "You on some kind of health kick now?" Leilani smiled, calm and steady. "Something like that." He didn't respond, just turned back to the TV. But Margaret, sitting nearby with a cold drink in hand, snorted. "Maybe if you put this much effort into your marriage, we'd have fewer problems." Leilani didn't flinch. Her voice was soft, but sharp. "Maybe if this marriage had more respect and less judgment, we'd all be doing better." Margaret blinked. So did Michael. They weren't used to that version of her, the one with a spine. She wasn't loud, she wasn't cruel, but she wasn't quiet anymore either. That night, she journaled for the first time in years. Not just numbers, but thoughts, feelings. She wrote about how chasing health had started to give her back her sense of self-worth, how walking had become a daily therapy, how she was learning that true wealth wasn't just about money in the bank. It was about emotional richness, knowing your values, and choosing peace over approval. One entry stood out. "You don't owe people your silence. You don't owe them your body. You don't owe them your shame." Every day after that, she walked a little farther. She bought a second-hand bike and started riding in the mornings. The Honolulu sun warmed her face as she pedaled past local markets and mom-and-pop cafes. People started noticing her. The woman at the corner store said, "You look different. You glowing or something?" Leilani laughed. "Just working on my health." Even strangers noticed the shift before her own husband did. Michael had grown distant, and not the kind of distant that meant stress or distraction, the kind that came with quiet resentment. He no longer mocked her, but he also never celebrated her. Margaret, on the other hand, seemed annoyed, as if Leilani's progress was somehow a threat. One morning, she made a backhanded comment at breakfast. "Losing 30 pounds doesn't fix a broken marriage, you know." Leilani sipped her tea. No, but it fixes me. Silence. And in that silence, she felt something rise inside her, a kind of confidence she hadn't tasted since she was a teenager, running barefoot on the sand in her grandma's backyard. The next week, she got a call from April, the woman from the support group. We're doing a local meetup next Saturday, just a few of us, women lifting each other up. You coming? Leilani hesitated. Michael didn't like her going places without him, not because he cared, but because he liked control. Still, she said yes. The meetup was at a small community center just off King Street. About 20 women gathered, different shapes, different stories, same fight. They shared tears, laughter, victories. Some had lost 20 pounds. Some were just starting. But they were all chasing the same thing: dignity, freedom, prosperity of the soul. Leilani stood up and shared her story. She talked about shame, about being called names, about eating in secret, about feeling like her worth was tied to a number on the scale, and how finally she was starting to believe that she was allowed to take up space. After she spoke, the room clapped. Not because her story was perfect, but because it was real. That night, back at home, she walked into the living room with her shoulders back. Michael barely looked up. Where you been? She said it clearly, with no fear. I was at a women's support group, talking about healing, talking about health, talking about life. He scoffed. You think this little glow-up is going to make you somebody? She looked him in the eye and replied, No, I already am somebody. You just stopped seeing it. And she walked out of the room. She didn't slam the door. She didn't cry. Because when a woman starts to understand her values, no insult can rewrite her story. And Leilani's story was just getting louder. Change doesn't ask for permission. By mid-July, the heat in Honolulu had settled like a blanket over the island. The palms barely swayed, and the sun felt heavier on the skin. But Leilani's steps were lighter. Her notebook now showed 278 pounds. That was 50 pounds gone since early June. But this wasn't just about pounds anymore. It was about presence. Leilani was starting to show up in her own life again. She wore colors now, not just black and gray. She bought a sky blue blouse from a thrift shop and paired it with white sandals. When she walked past store windows, she didn't turn her head away anymore. She looked. She owned her reflection, and people noticed. Leilani, girl, is that you? Said Malia, an old friend from high school, as they bumped into each other at the farmer's market near Ward Avenue. Leilani smiled. Yeah, it's me. Been working on my health. You look amazing, like glowing. What are you doing? She laughed. Walking, eating better, sleeping, saying no when I need to. Malia nodded. Whatever you're doing, it's working. You've got that wealthy woman energy now. That word stuck with Leilani. Wealthy. But not in a money sense. In a values sense. She was rich in peace, rich in purpose, rich in strength. Back at home, things were colder than ever. Michael barely talked to her. Margaret had stopped making comments altogether, which almost felt worse than the insults. There was this tension in the air, like they both knew something was shifting, but neither of them wanted to name it. Until one day, Margaret finally broke the silence. So what's your end goal here, Leilani? Trying to prove something? Leilani didn't look up from her book. I'm not proving anything. I'm healing. Margaret huffed. You think some salad and jogs are going to fix a life of bad choices? Leilani stood up slowly, calm but firm. I don't think anything fixes overnight. But every day I choose my health, I choose my future. And that's more than you've ever chosen for me. That was the first time Margaret had nothing to say. Later that night, Michael confronted her. Why are you acting like you're better than everyone? She looked at him, really looked at him. The man she once adored. The man she defended when people warned her. The man who had let his mother chip away at her spirit day after day. "I'm not better than anyone," she said quietly. "I'm just no longer begging for scraps of respect." He rolled his eyes. "You know what this looks like? You lose 50 pounds and suddenly you think you're some kind of star." She stepped forward. Her voice didn't shake. "No. I lost 50 pounds of shame, of silence, of pretending. And now I'm finally living." Michael stared at her. For the first time in years, he looked uncertain. Like the control he had grown comfortable with was slipping. The next morning, Leilani did something bold. She signed up for a free fitness class at a community center. It was called Move with Meaning, led by a local trainer named Jasmine. The class was full of women of all sizes, backgrounds, and goals. It wasn't about being skinny. It was about being strong. During cool-down stretches, Jasmine said something that hit Leilani right in the chest. "You're not starting over. You're rising up." That night, Leilani sat on her porch, sipping iced green tea, writing in her journal. She wrote about wealth, but not the financial kind. The kind of wealth that grows when you set boundaries, when you choose yourself, when you decide your value isn't based on who approves of you. She wrote, "Real prosperity is waking up and knowing you're not stuck anymore." A few days later, she passed by a boutique she used to avoid. There was a dress in the window, a deep emerald green, flowing, sleeveless, bold. She walked in, tried it on, and it fit. Not perfectly, but beautifully. She didn't buy it that day. She wasn't there yet. But just trying it on was a revolution. Walking back home, she passed a group of tourists taking pictures. One of them, a middle-aged man, looked at her and smiled. She smiled back, not because she needed his approval, but because it felt good to take up space in the world and not shrink. That evening, as the sun melted into the Pacific, casting the whole sky in gold, Leilani whispered to herself, "They don't know who I'm becoming." And neither did she. But that was the best part. Because when a woman begins to rise, she doesn't need permission. She just needs courage. 100 days strong. It was Sunday, September 11th, 2005. Exactly 100 days since Leilani had taken that first shaky walk to the end of her street. 100 days since she'd whispered, "What if she's wrong?" in front of the mirror. 100 days of sweat, silence, pushing through pain, and reclaiming her life inch by inch. Her notebook now read, 245 pounds. That was 83 pounds gone, 83 pounds of pain, of fear, of apology. She stood on the scale and didn't just see a number. She saw power. That afternoon, she stood in front of her closet, pulling out clothes that no longer fit. Shirts too loose, jeans that slid down her waist, dresses she had once hidden behind. She stuffed them into trash bags. Not because she hated them, but because they weren't her anymore. They were survival clothes. And she wasn't surviving now, she was living. She dropped the bags off at the Goodwill on Baratania Street. And as she got back in the car, she caught a glimpse of herself in the rearview mirror. Her jawline was visible. Her collarbones peeked through the neckline of her shirt. But more than that, her eyes were focused. Alive. At home, things were shifting too. Margaret had grown quieter. She no longer tossed jabs. She didn't dare. Leilani's silence had changed. It wasn't fear anymore. It was clarity. Margaret could feel the difference, and so could Michael. He was unsettled. Some nights he'd try to talk, sit beside her on the couch and bring up old memories. But there was no warmth in it. Just noise. You remember that trip to Maui? He asked one night, staring at the ceiling. Leilani paused. Yeah, that was a good weekend. You looked different then. She nodded. Yeah, I was exhausted and pretending to be happy. He turned toward her. You're really going to throw all of this away? She met his eyes. Michael, I'm not throwing anything away. I'm just not carrying what doesn't serve me anymore. He didn't respond. Because there's nothing to say when someone finally understands their worth. Later that week, Leilani walked into the community center and signed up for a nutrition course. She wasn't just chasing numbers now. She was chasing knowledge, understanding, long-term health. The instructor asked everyone to introduce themselves. I'm Leilani. I'm from Honolulu. I've lost 83 pounds, and I'm here because I want to build a life around better values. I want to make my strength sustainable. I'm not doing this to be small. I'm doing this to be free. There was a short pause before the room erupted in applause. During break, one of the women, a nurse named Keisha, came up to her. You ever thought about becoming a coach? You got that fire in your voice. People need that. Leilani laughed. Me? A coach? Why not? You've already done what most people are scared to start. That night she couldn't sleep. The idea circled in her head like waves crashing against the reef. What if helping others heal was part of her next chapter? What if her pain wasn't just something to overcome, but something to use? The next morning she wrote in her journal, real prosperity isn't about flashy things. It's about living in alignment with your truth. It's about waking up proud of the life you're building. It's not about just making money. It's about making meaning. She closed the journal and sat with that thought. Maybe wealth wasn't just measured in dollars. Maybe it was in mornings like this. Quiet, steady, filled with purpose. That afternoon, she received a message from April. You free for lunch this week? I want you to meet someone. He runs a wellness nonprofit for women recovering from emotional abuse. Leilani didn't hesitate. Yes, I'd love that. It had been a long time since she'd said yes to something that didn't benefit anyone else. That simple word felt like sunlight in her chest. The next morning, she picked out the emerald green dress she hadn't bought weeks ago. Except this time, she had gone back for it. It hugged her waist, floated at her knees, and made her feel like someone who belonged to herself. She brushed her hair into soft curls, added light makeup, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she looked in the mirror and didn't search for flaws. She saw a woman who had walked through fire and came out gold. Michael walked into the hallway, stopped mid-step, and just stared. You're going somewhere? He asked. She smiled. Yes, somewhere better. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Because when a woman reclaims her voice, it silences everything that tried to drown her. Let them watch. By the first week of October, Honolulu's winds began to shift. The air smelled like rain, and the streets were scattered with golden leaves from monkey pod trees. Leilani stood at her bedroom window early one morning, sipping black coffee, her notebook resting on the windowsill. The number read, 217 pounds. She had lost 111 pounds since June. But what she'd gained? That was the true story. She had gained self-respect, she had gained clarity, and most of all, she had gained peace, the kind of peace that didn't ask permission to exist. At the wellness nonprofit, Leilani had started volunteering. Every Thursday evening, she led a small group of women who were also walking through emotional recovery. Some were dealing with divorce, some with grief, some with their own weight battles. But in every single session, she spoke the same truth. You are not the problem. The silence is. And every time she said it, she healed a little more too. One evening, as the group wrapped up, A young woman named Kara approached her. "You talk like someone who's been through it." Leilani smiled. "That's because I have." "Can I ask you something?" Kara said. "How do you deal with people who still try to drag you back into who you used to be?" Leilani didn't even have to think. You don't. You rise, and you let them watch. That night, she wrote that sentence in bold letters across a fresh page in her journal. You rise, and you let them watch. At home, things had grown distant. Michael no longer made passive-aggressive comments. But he also didn't ask about her life. He didn't ask about the non-profit. He didn't notice the dress sizes shrinking or the sparkle returning to her voice. Because he didn't know how to handle a woman who was no longer begging for scraps of attention. Margaret, on the other hand, had grown strangely polite. One afternoon, Leilani was meal prepping in the kitchen. Grilled salmon, steamed broccoli, brown rice, and Margaret peeked in. "Smells good." Leilani nodded. "It's clean eating, helps with inflammation, boosts energy." Margaret nodded back. "Maybe I should try it sometime." That was it. No sarcasm, no insults, just a sentence. And in that moment, Leilani realized something. The same woman who had once humiliated her at every turn was now watching her. Quietly. Carefully. Because even the cruelest people recognize power when it walks into a room and no longer bows. Later that week, Leilani received a message from Jasmine, the trainer from the community center. "We're hosting a citywide wellness expo next month. We're honoring local women who've transformed their lives. I nominated you." Leilani froze at the message. Her heart raced. "Me? On a stage?" Jasmine replied. "You didn't lose, just wait. You found yourself. That's rare. That's powerful." She stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "Okay, I'll do it." She told no one at home. This one? This moment? It was hers. On the day of the event, Leilani stood backstage, dressed in a fitted navy blue jumpsuit that hugged her figure. Her hair was down in soft waves, her makeup light and radiant. She had never felt more herself. When her name was called, the crowd clapped before she even stepped onto the stage. She walked slowly, steadily, like a woman who had rebuilt herself from rubble and now knew the weight of her own name. The spotlight didn't scare her, because the real stage had always been her life. She spoke for 7 minutes. She talked about growing up in Honolulu, about shame, about silence, about chasing health over numbers, freedom over approval, and prosperity that had nothing to do with money, but everything to do with values. She said, "I used to think wealth was what you could hold in your hands, but now I know. Real wealth is walking into a room and not shrinking. It's being healthy enough to show up fully, love deeply, and never, ever apologize for existing." The room erupted in applause. From the back row, April wiped away tears. Leilani stepped off the stage to a line of women waiting to hug her. She was no longer the invisible wife, no longer the silent girl in the back of the room. She was a woman who had been humiliated, dismissed, and nearly erased, and who now stood as proof that redemption is real. That evening, she returned home. Michael sat on the couch, half watching a football game. She walked in, heels in her hand, eyes glowing. He looked up, startled. "Where were you?" She paused for a beat. "I was speaking at an event." He frowned. "Why didn't you tell me?" She shrugged gently. "Because I didn't need permission." He stared at her, really stared. For the first time in months, he seemed to see her. Not the woman he married, but the woman she had become. And in that moment, his face changed. Not with anger, but with something else. Regret, a deep, sickening regret, because now he knew. She wasn't waiting to be loved anymore. She had learned how to love herself. and nothing terrified him more than that. He saw her and fainted in the hallway. It was Saturday, November 5th, 2005. Exactly 155 days since Leilani took her first walk. The Honolulu sky was a soft gray, with rain clouds resting gently over the ocean. But inside Leilani, the sun was shining brighter than it ever had. Her scale read 190 pounds. She had lost 138 pounds. But more importantly, she had lost fear. She had lost shame. And in their place, she found wealth. Not in the form of money, but in the kind of prosperity that grows when a woman rebuilds her soul from scratch. That afternoon, she was invited to a reunion at Michael's extended family's house. One of his cousins had just returned from the mainland, and there was a small gathering in the community center near Waikiki. She debated not going, but then she remembered who she was now, and decided to show up, not to prove anything, but simply to be. Leilani wore a fitted, wine-colored dress, heels that clicked confidently on the pavement, and a gold pendant her grandmother once gave her. Her hair was swept into a high bun, elegant and clean. Her posture wasn't just upright, it was regal. As she stepped into the building, people turned. A pause, a beat, whispers. Is that Leilani? Michael had arrived earlier. He hadn't seen her walk in. She moved slowly, gracefully, nodding as distant relatives offered stunned stares and awkward smiles. And then it happened. Michael turned the corner, his eyes locked with hers, and his body, visibly stunned, froze. He took one step back, fumbled, and collapsed straight onto the cold hallway floor. Gasps echoed through the room. Someone yelled, "Michael, you okay?" People rushed to him. Margaret ran over, panicked. "Get some water." Leilani just stood still. No panic, no revenge, just presence. Someone turned to her and whispered, "What happened to you?" She smiled gently. "I found my health. I found my voice. I found my life again." Michael sat up slowly, eyes wide, face pale. He looked at her like he was seeing a stranger he could never reach again. Because the woman who once begged for attention, for love, for value, was gone. Later, as the crowd settled, Margaret approached her quietly. "You look different." Leilani nodded. "I am." There was a long pause, and then, for the first time, Margaret said something she never had before. "I was wrong." Leilani didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. Some apologies arrive late, others never come at all. But this one, it didn't change the past. It just confirmed what she already knew, that she had risen. And they had watched. Back at home, later that evening, Leilani stood by the window again. Rain trickled down the glass, soft and slow. She made herself a cup of chamomile tea, wrapped in a new robe she'd bought for herself. Not because it was on sale, but because she deserved something beautiful. Michael stood in the doorway. He hadn't spoken much since the hallway. "You're really leaving, aren't you?" he asked, his voice small. She didn't turn around. "I left the version of me you knew a long time ago." He walked in slowly. "I didn't realize what I had until—" She stopped him with a gentle glance. "You didn't realize because you never looked. And now it's too late." He stood in silence. She took a sip of tea and stared out at the wet streets of Honolulu. They were quiet, peaceful. "I'm not angry anymore," she said. "I just finally understand my worth. That's the kind of riches no one can give you, and no one can take away." He nodded, slowly. There was nothing else to say. That night, Leilani packed a small suitcase. She didn't need much, just her notebook, her journal, her clothes, and her newfound self. She wasn't running. She was walking away on her own terms, free, whole, unapologetically herself. As the sun rose the next morning, Leilani walked out the door, not with regret, but with purpose. Because redemption isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a woman walking into her own life, finally knowing she belongs.